be seated right where you're at. As you're seated, I just want to say thank you for those of you who you're helping us with our seating. We had seats available for when people came in late today, and thank you for that. I just want you to know that we believe 2022 is going to be one of the greatest years in our church's history, and I'm excited about that. And I think so many people are taking next steps. I'll tell you more in the coming weeks of just opportunities that are happening. But let's just talk about the elephant in the room for a minute, all right? This has been a polarizing topic or a polarizing title. We've had people stealing yard signs because they're mad. We've had people sending hate mail. Some people were out stealing yard signs yesterday while we had 30 people going through lay counselor training to help people deal with their trauma. You see the difference? And so at the end of the day, what I want to do is be the church where people who feel like they can't connect to church because they don't feel like the church acknowledges their pain, they have a place to come and find Jesus. That's what I want us to be. And so we have received, I personally have been attacked verbally and have received hate mail, and we've received text and emails and social media and even snail mail. Who does that anymore? I don't get it, y'all. Somebody texted me yesterday, hey, I got this letter in the mail. It's a full-page letter. What do you want me to do with it? I said, there's a shredder in the office. I don't want to see it. And so I hate it if you spent too much time doing that. But at the end of the day, man, we don't answer to the religious crowd in our community. We answer to the God of the universe who sent his son to a dirtball called Earth to give his life. And I'm just going to say something that might fly in the face. I think Jesus' life sucked when he went on the cross. And he did it for you and for me. And so he took your pain and your sin after living a sinless life and nailed it to that cross and was put in a tomb and was resurrected. And we're going to tell the good news to the people who are hurting in our community. And that's what we're going to stand for. And so at the end of the day, how do you respond, though? I want us to respond with grace, but also the fact that we respond with our mission. And so we put out a post on social media this week after our staff. I think I'm more comfortable with it. Some of our staff are. But we put out a post that just simply said, we're not going to quit going after people far from God. We're not going to quit loving those who are hurting. But we're going to respond with grace and dignity, because here's what I need you to understand. Even the people who attack, they're also created in the image of God. And so listen, we don't have to agree on methods. We don't have to agree on anything. But at the end of the day, we are all humans, and we are all going to respond with grace and dignity and not lash out and exacerbate the situation, because we just believe at the end of the day, the church ought to be walking with a positive message, not a negative one. And so we love you. And maybe you're here for the first time. We have people send a message, multiple of you sent a message this week saying, I'm coming to your church for the first time because you finally said something that I understand. And so we're glad you are here. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in our culture and our community and why this series. In the last year, we've had 8 people connected to people in our church who have taken their own life. 8. Somewhere along the way, they felt like life wasn't worth living. The life was too hard. Life was too difficult. Can I tell you, suicide is never the answer. You never make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. But there's too many people that are feeling like that. So I want to just kind of go over some statistics. We had 30 people going through our lay counselor training. I'm so excited about that, just to help navigate all the chaos that people are facing. I just want to give you some statistics. Julie brought this manual home last night, and I just dug into it for about 2 hours and also just did some more research on statistics that are happening in our community, in America, not to mention across the world. I just want to talk about in our country right now. Do you know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in America? The 10th leading cause of death. But here's what's more astounding. It's the 132 Americans die each day because of suicide. 1.4 million people attempted suicide last year. 1.4. It's the second leading cause of death, hear me, between the ages of 10 and 34. Second only to accidental harm, like a car accident or some kind of thing that was beyond their control. It is 35% increase in suicide since 1999. Do y'all know what happened in 1999, 2000? The internet. And now we have the internet on the phones in our kids' hands. We have the world's problems at their fingertips. 90% of people who committed suicide were diagnosed with some kind of mental health condition at their death. And mental health, if you know anything from COVID in the last few years, mental health is on the rise. Mental health struggles and battles. Let me just be honest with you. Mental health does not mean you're crazy. It means life happened to you. And it means that you are trying to learn to process what's happened to you in a healthy way. And so that's why we have to quit pretending like people who have mental health or anxiety or things of that nature, we have to, listen, we all are going to experience some of that at some point in our life. And so we want to help people navigate that conversation. So let's talk about mental health. People who have mental health struggles that don't get help and navigate through the pain of that, it leads to major increase in these problems in our culture. Sickness, disease, homelessness, incarceration, substance abuse, physical and sexual abuse, and divorce. So if you want to know the net impact of what's happened in the last 24 months, that's what's going to happen if we don't really tackle what's going on in people's minds and how they see life. The mental health statistics are struggling with some sort of mental health diagnosis has doubled in the last 24 months, from 21% to nearly 40%. Mood disorders are the number one reason for hospitalizations behind pregnancy and labor. So the number two reason people are admitted to the hospital behind pregnancy and labor is mood disorders, because life is spinning out of control and learning to process. And what can we do? How do we respond? Depression and anxiety disorders cost the global economy $1 trillion in lost productivity every year. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. Now, let's talk about other chronic, problems that are happening as a result of the last 18 to 24 months. As if sexual abuse in our community and in our world is not already bad enough. It's going to increase, I think, more, but let me give you some of the most recent statistics prior to COVID. 1 in 6 adolescents ages 14 to 17 years old was sexually abused last year. 1 in 6 between 14 and 17 was abused just last year. How does that play itself out over a 2 to 3 year period? I don't know. We don't have those statistics, but still, 1 in 6 is any child that's sexually abused is too many. At least one person agrees with me. 2 in 5 females were sexually abused or assaulted last year. 1 in 5 males have been sexually abused. And 1 out of 4 of the victims are actually under the age of 10. This broke my heart. People with disabilities are twice as likely to be sexually abused. And we want to say, just pray. Well, if it were that easy just to pray your problems, I'm all for prayer. We're going to end today talking about prayer. But at the end of the day, there's some real hurt and some real pain that people need people to come alongside and walk through and not just speak down in some condescending religious way. Of those people who were abused, 80% of them were sexually abused by an acquaintance. Listen, 95% of child victims who were abused, 95% know their abuser. An American is sexually assaulted every 93 seconds. So you do the math. Since I've been talking, there's been 3 sexual assaults. And out of 1,000 victims, 995 of the perpetrators will go unpunished and continue to do the same thing. You know what that means? The people who have been abused know that the person who abused them is walking free and never paid the You don't think that puts a pressure on people's lives that's a little bit overwhelming? And if you've gone through this and you've experienced this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you feel like nobody understands and you carry guilt and shame that is not your fault and your abuser's walking free. People say, just pray. God is good. It's a little more complicated than that when it comes to your emotions and the way you process. So they did a study this past year of 1,320 counselors and therapists. Not all these are Christian counselors, but I just want you to hear what 1,320 on a nationwide scale said. That 7 to 10 people a week, on average, are walking into counseling centers, these 1,320 counselors that were surveyed and therapists that were surveyed, and they're being turned away because they don't have time slots. 7 out of 10. 7 to 10, per week. You do that, 500 plus people are walking into counseling centers, not just one, not all, just one here, one there, one here, can't get an appointment because they're overworked. There's long waiting lists, intensifying problems in children and trying to get children counseling, and the overwhelming sense of how to deal with a new childhood trauma. Marriages are struggling more than ever because they were in quarantine and realized they didn't like each other. Couples therapists are slammed. And when they asked these 1,320 counselors and therapists what they saw in the future, 6 out of 10 think the demand will remain just as high in 2022 as it was in 2021. The other 4 out of 10 say that they think the demand is going to increase in 2022. None of them said it's going backwards. Look at me in the eyes. It's a crisis. 15 months ago, we opened these doors again in September of 2020, and I told you we were opening this because the crisis that we were going to face would far outlive a physical pandemic. It would be a mental health pandemic. And now we're addressing it. We're trying to go after it. We're trying to go after the fact. See, circumstances in life does create chaos, but what we have to do, all of us have to try to get to a place where we can process these things in a healthy mindset. And so then, let me just read you a couple quotes from some of these marriage counselors. Leah Seeger in Minnesota said this. She's a marriage and family therapist. She said, I believe I will be helping navigate the effects of the pandemic for the rest of my career. Patricia Garcia Mulligan in Port Orchard, Washington said, I'm already watching marriages crumble. Listen to this. None of the problems that they are presenting with are new. It's just their capacity to have resilience and compassion, and everyone is just too worn down. You see why we do a series like this? Because people are hurting. Trauma is very real, and people don't know how to respond. So let's do what some of you grew up on in church on Sunday. Sit, stand, kneel. Here's what we're going to do. Everybody stand up real quick. Some of y'all like flashbacks. All right. In this room, I'm going to give you some statistics. Out of every 1,000 people, I'm just going to show you how this would play out in the number of people in this room, statistically speaking. 670 out of every 1,000 people, that's 67 out of 1,000, experience some level of trauma in their life. Of those 670, 160 of them experience extreme trauma. So let's have some fun here. You guys over here, y'all take a seat. Top right or top left over here. Okay, take a seat. All right. You guys on this side, take a seat. Now look around. In this room, this is just a general idea. This is the amount of people in this room, statistically, that experience some sort of trauma in their life. Some sort of trauma. And most people have never dealt with it. And I'm going to show you some alarming statistics in a minute. All right. Now, you guys, and you guys, take a seat. In this room, not these people, so don't freak out. These people represent the number of people in this room that have experienced extreme trauma in their life. Layer upon layer upon layer. Okay, you guys can be seated. And we want to go stealing people's yard signs out of the yard because we don't understand the big picture. Here's what I need you to understand. What happens to these people, this representative group here, and everybody else who've experienced trauma? Let me just, out of 1,000 people, 1/3, 330 people out of 1,000 would take a trauma assessment and say they have not experienced any level of trauma. Of those people who have not experienced trauma, listen to this. 1 in 16 of them smoke. 1 in 69 are an alcoholic. 1 in 480 use some kind of intravenous drugs. 1 in 14 has heart disease. And 1 in 96 attempt suicide. Now, fast forward to those that have experienced extreme trauma, 160 out of every 1,000. Not 1 in 16 smoke, but 1 in 6. Not 1 in 69 are alcoholic, but 1 in 6. Not 1 in 480 use IV drugs, but 1 in 30. Not 1 in 14 has heart disease, but 1 in 6. Not 1 in 96 attempt suicide. Ready for this? 1 in 5. Can I propose to you today, you can't take in a trauma, if you lived the last 24 months, it's impossible for you to take a trauma assessment and not have experienced trauma. There aren't 1/3 of the people who haven't experienced trauma anymore. Because what has happened in the last 24 months has been traumatic at some level for everyone. And we wonder why the church is losing its voice in America is we got to speak truth into pain and into dark places. So, there's been shrapnel that's happened in the last 2 years, right? I mean, we have had suicide, mental health crisis, loved ones that we've lost. We've had sickness, disease, marriages, isolation, resentment, anger. All of those things are happening, right? Those are traumatic experiences. You say, what is trauma? Trauma is something where I'm walking through my life and I have an expectation and something comes in and kind of upsets that expectation. So I'm married, I think things are going well, and then all of a sudden, there's an affair. I'm going through life, my dad walks out. Maybe it's you experienced trauma secondhand, but it still hurt you and affected you. And so the reality is, here's what, you understand you cannot experience trauma and it not affect you. And here's what I want you to see. All of us in the year, September 11th, we experienced trauma, right? But we were far removed from it, and so it only had a certain impact on us. I mean, yes, there was some anxiety that came with that. You want to know who experienced the real trauma? Talk to the families of the people in the towers, right? So here's how trauma, I'm going through my life. I don't know I have these situations in life, and some kind of bomb, something explodes in my life. It doesn't even have to be a major crisis. Some are major: abuse, neglect, some kind of major sickness, some kind of major loss, some kind of situation in your life where somebody walks out on you or somebody hurts you or something. And all of a sudden, this bomb goes off. And when the bomb goes off, there's no way you can get out of the way. The shrapnel, some component is going to land on you. It's going to affect you. And listen to me, if you're close enough to people that have experienced trauma, you're going to be affected too. And we pretend as if these things have no effect. And what most people would say, or most people have done, I should say, is they have just taken that situation and pretended like it's not happened, put it in a box and buried it. And so I'm trying as a pastor in this season, and I never knew 2.5 years ago when we started having this conversation as a staff about reaching people and dealing with brokenness and the crisis, I never thought it would lead this far down this rabbit trail. But when you start understanding it, it is out of control. And people are pretending, everybody in their life goes, man, that had to hurt. And they're like, no, I'm good. You're like, I saw the effects of it. I saw it blow up in your face. You used to be this way, but then you buried it and you pretend. Now you're angry. Now there's resentment. And this is why so many times over the last 18 months, I've had conversations with so many people. And they just simply said, you know what? Life sucks right now. Life sucks right now. So I said, okay. That is probably the number one phrase that I have heard from people in church and out of church. I was at a family gathering at Christmas. I was like, wow, we're doing a series on that. Because people, they don't know how it's to express what they feel. And so we're going after it. And I want to dig in today, starting this series. We're going to look back at a passage in Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to talk through it, but I want you to write this down. There was a time in your past where your past was your future. You're like, oh, wait a second. Just trying to figure out how to get out of bed this morning. Let's play it this way. 2020 and 2021 is the past. But in 2019, that was your future. And we weren't ready for it, were we? We didn't even know we weren't ready for it. You say, what are you saying, Carl? What are you trying to say? Here's what I need you to understand. What is happening in your life right now is your present. But tomorrow, next year, 2 years down the road is your future. And what I want us to do is to begin looking past this moment and realize whatever's going on in your life right now, one day you can look back on and find healing from. That's what I want you to grasp today. I don't want you to be 2 years down the road going, oh my gosh, I'm still in this cycle. Nobody seemed to get down in the pit and help me with this whole conversation. And here's what I need you to understand. Sometimes you can't see the goodness of God in the middle of certain seasons. You're in the middle. Next week we're going to talk about the messy middle. I thought God was good. I want to believe God is good. But right now, it ain't good. And so sometimes in the middle of what you're going through, you got to remember, there's something on the other side. Or, in today's conversation, we're going to look back at the goodness of God in others people's lives and say, God, sometimes we can't see it right now in our present, but we can see your goodness to your people historically. And we're believing for a greater day. So let's look back at a man by the name of David. David was the king of the nation of Israel. He was a shepherd boy who became the king. He was not really cut out for a kingship by the world standards. David has some ups and some downs and some upside downs. Some happened to David while he's trying not to be killed. Other things happened because David made stupid mistakes. We're going to talk about that in a few weeks. Nonetheless, David would come to these seasons of his life and he would say things like, You've pulled me out of the pit. You've set my feet upon the rock. You've pulled me out of the miry clay. And he would look back at the goodness of God and the people of Israel and the children of Israel, and he would reflect in down seasons of the goodness of God in other people's lives so he could keep his mind focused on positive things. And so we're going to look back at a man by the name of Joseph. What happens is in this particular psalm we're going to read, he's going to talk about a man by the name of Joseph in Genesis 37, where Joseph is the youngest of 12 brothers. He's the favorite of 12 brothers. He has a richly ornamented robe. It's decked out in all the jewels, and his brothers got cut off overalls. I mean, that's the way I'm trying to apply it to those of you who don't understand. At the end of the day, he was the favored son of his father. And he's got 11 brothers who first of all, he's the favored son. That's already bad enough. And then Joseph has this dream, and in this dream, he sees his brothers and his father and his mother bowing down. Now, let me pause for a second. Joseph is 17. This brother's just now out of puberty. And he has a dream, and rather than keeping it to himself, he is a 17-year-old, got to tell you, right? Any 17-year-olds, you get excited. I'm 42. I get excited when I have this big picture. I want to tell somebody. And he goes and he tells his brothers, and it didn't go so well.
Still coming down.
Stuff will be coming down at Christmas next year. 17, and it didn't go so well. And so now they take him and they conspire to kill him, but ultimately they end up throwing him in a pit. Everybody say this with me so we can offend all the other religious people in town. Pit happens. And sometimes you don't see it coming. Sometimes you don't see it coming. And so now Joseph is in this pit, and David's looking back on Joseph's life. And he sees the hand of God. Joseph can't see it when he's in the pit. He has no idea what's happening, and decades would pass before he sees it transpire. But David can look back and see it. Do you see where I'm going? Remember, there was a moment where your past was your future, right? But we can't see what's going on now until we get to the other side of it sometimes. And so David's able to look at Joseph's life and say, oh, let me tell you what happened. And listen to what he said in Psalm chapter 9, verse 16. It says, God, called down famine on the land, talking about the land of Israel, the Israelites, the Jewish people. He was trying to get their attention. And he destroyed all their supplies of food. But he sent a man before them named Joseph, who was sold as a slave. Pause. Joseph, we're going to find out later in the story, when the mother and father and the brothers, they all come and they bow down, what Joseph's doing is giving them food because they have a famine. So God's preparing this whole thing. And now Joseph's actually going to save his own family by being generous to them in spite of what they did to him. And it says, they bruised his feet, talking about Joseph, with shackles. His neck was put in irons. Okay? Till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved him true, and the king sent and released him. The ruler of the people set him free. He made him master of his household, ruler of all he possessed, to instruct his princes as he pleased and teach his elders wisdom. What is David saying? David said he was put in a pit. He was sold as a slave. He was in shackles and bruised and beaten, but God had a bigger plan. Here's the problem. You can't acknowledge God's bigger plan and help people understand God's bigger plan till you acknowledge the pain they actually went through. And too many people, you're like, oh, bless God. It's all right. All things work together for the good of those that love God. And you're like, yeah, but you missed out on the process. And we say then, just pray and trust God. Well, I wouldn't be here. If we could pray and trust God, we'd have prayed COVID away. Wouldn't we? But you know why we have these situations that happen in life? It's called a thing that happened in Genesis 3, sin. It was perfect. We screwed it up, and the effects of sin have been through generations, sickness, disease, death, all those things come. And now we can find peace in prayer. Sure, we can lean into the presence of God. But when Jesus sweat like drops of blood, it was because he was stressed. He found peace in prayer, but the reason he sweat like drops of blood is because his capillaries burst because he was stressed and finally found peace, and then boom, he starts sweating like drops. Jesus, it wasn't great for him at times, if you don't know that already. And so Joseph is living in the middle of this, and David says, man, look at how God did it for Joseph. And Joseph's going, this ain't cool. So retelling of what happened in Genesis chapter 37 through 50. And David is recounting the faithfulness to his people and how he used God in the process. But this is not the only time that this is referenced by another man of God in the scriptures. Acts chapter number 7, the New Testament. Stephen, a follower of Jesus, is about to be stoned to death, killed for his faith. And he preaches his last sermon. Life is not good for Stephen, y'all. Stoning. You say, what is stoning? Not 21st century stoning. Okay? This is stones that are beaten. He's bludgeoned by throwing these heavy stones until he dies. That is stoning. He's about to be stoned to death. And in Acts chapter 7, when it's all hitting the fan, when life sucks for him right now, listen to what he says. He references Joseph. He says, because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, these are his 11 brothers, they sold him as a slave to Egypt. Listen to this. But God was with him. God was with him in the pit. God was with him in the prison. God was with him when he was accused. We're going to talk about these things next week. And he rescued him from all his troubles. The problem that you don't see, Stephen doesn't say it took 17 years, 20 years. Stephen doesn't tell us the timeline. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain goodwill of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Yeah, a decade later. So Pharaoh made him ruler over Egypt and all his palace. That sounds great, but Joseph didn't know that in the pit. Do you know it's possible to look at what God did in someone else's day and be encouraged because you're living your life in real time? This is why you can sit down sometimes with some of those people who are a little more seasoned than you, and you can see how they walk through some hell on earth. They can hold your hand and they'll say, baby, I know. I don't fully understand, but I'm going to sit here and I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to walk through and you can cry on their shoulder and you can find the goodness of God in that relationship because you know they've been through some stuff. That's why we have a prayer team. That's why we have these lay counselors. That's why, because people have gone through some junk and they've dealt with it and they want to walk. And you can, when you see God's hand at work in somebody else's life and they're good, you can take refuge knowing and find encouragement in those seasons. And so in the middle, listen, of what is happening, you have to learn the difference in what you are seeing and what God is saying. And so Joseph sees a pit. He has a dream. That was great. He sees the pit. That ain't what God was saying. In my dream, God, that ain't what I saw. That ain't what I heard. I thought I was going to be in some kind of royalty, but now I'm in the pit, and there's no water in the pit. And now, some 20-ish years later, the timeline unfolds, and we're going to fast forward to the end of the story. His brothers coming because there's no food, and they bow down and they worship, and they say, hey, we need food, and Joseph blesses them with food, and he breaks out into tears because there's 5 or 10 other events that happen along the way. But when he gets to the end, look at what he says to his brothers in Genesis 50, verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. All I'm saying is whatever you're going through in your life, I'm not going to be the pastor that said, oh, God's still got a purpose. What I am going to tell you is the potential that's on the other side of what you're going through may be life-changing. It may be world-changing. It may change your family tree. It may change generations to come. But you and I have to deal with our junk. And so in Psalm chapter 9, we see David talking about it. What is David referring to? In Genesis 37, he's referring to the dream that Joseph had. where he tells his brothers, they're offended, and they put him in a pit instead of killing him. And so all of us go through these pit situations where we can't always keep them. We don't see them coming. Somebody pushes us into a pit. It just happens at times. And we don't know how to navigate these seasons of our life when pit happens, when we don't see it coming, but we're down there, there's no water to drink. And listen to what happens and how it transpired in Joseph's life. He doesn't see it coming. It says, but they saw him in the distance. So Joseph is coming out to tell his brother something sent by his father, and they see him in a distance. And before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. He's just bebopping. And they're like, let's kill him. He had no idea. And they said this, here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Let's kill him and lie to Dad. Then we'll see if his dreams come true. And thank God for this man. When Reuben heard this is his brother, he tried to rescue him from their hands. If I can be anything to those of you who are struggling today and you feel like life is out of control and you feel like life really does suck, I want to be Reuben to you. And I want to say, hey, let's not kill him. Let's spare him. Let's make sure they know that life, there's a purpose in your pain. So Reuben tries to conspire another way to keep from killing him because he don't really know what to do. And he says this, don't shed any blood. Throw him into a cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. He was going to take him back. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and they threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty, and there was no water in it. I love the detail in Scripture. In other words, how long can he even live there without water? So what do you do when life sucks? What do you do when pit happens? I'm going to give you two thoughts, and then we're going to circle back to this next week. These are simple, but if you really want to deal with this, you're going to have to be here for the next 4 weeks after this. When you feel like life sucks, here's the first thing. Control what you can. And here's the second one. When you feel like life sucks, don't obsess over what you cannot. You know there's some things beyond your control, but there's a lot of things that are in your control, or at least a few things that are in your control. Maybe you say, Carl, you don't understand because I'm in an abusive situation right now. You know what? We want to help you out of that. You can't control it, but what we can do is try to get you in a safe place. You said, because you know if you went through something as a child or you've gone through some sort of hell or some sort of torment that somebody else has put, there's very few things that are within your control. So what happens is Joseph is sold into slavery. Out of that pit, he's bought by a man named Potiphar on an auction block. David tells us, Stephen tells us, we know that he's put in shackles, he's bruised, he's beaten to some degree, he goes through some kind of pain. And most of the details of Joseph's life are out of his control. Let's be honest. He has a dream. He has no control over his future. Nothing. He's a slave in Potiphar's house, and he's told what to do and how to do it. His everyday life is controlled by someone else. The only thing he had control over, you ready for this? Was being the best slave he could be. That's it. That don't sound like fun, does it? But what he could control was his attitude. What he could control was what was right in front of him. Here's what you and I have to understand in life. We don't get to pick the situation, but we get to choose how we approach the situation. And if I can do anything in this series, is give you the power of perspective. To allow you and I to begin to maybe just see beyond our pain. To face our misery knowing that God has mercy. To know that throughout the Old Testament, people went through hell, that God could have killed them, but he was merciful on them. And if you'll do that for them, how much more will he do it because of what he sent Jesus on this planet to do for us? You can face pain, I can face pain, and prosper at the same time. It may not be the dream you had in your heart. You may not see it. You may not experience it in the moment, but it is possible to be in a season of suffering and still do it successfully? You say, Carl, you don't have a clue. Now listen, if you're 9 years old and you're being sexually abused, the only way to do that is for somebody to come alongside of you and help you walk through that and find your identity and help you recover from that. But that's what we want to be here, to walk through that situation, to help you in that season. So how do you suffer successfully? Well, we're adults in here. We're not talking to kids. We're at least teenagers. I think we can comprehend this. You have to control your mentality and your outlook. So what the enemy says is, this happened to you. You're a victim. You have no future. You should live in shame. You should live in guilt. You should live in condemnation. What God says is, therefore, in Christ Jesus, there is no condemnation. He says, I don't want you to live in shame. Shame is not a tool in my toolbox. I want you to find wholeness and healing with the body of Christ. And so, Joseph is in this pit. And he did so well in this season, he's a slave in Potiphar's house. He does so well in this season. He's becoming the best slave Potiphar has. He's doing what he can. And now, a few chapters later, we see that Potiphar's estate has been entrusted to Joseph. He's in control of everything in Potiphar's estate. He's a very, very wealthy man. The only thing he can't do is he can't mess around with Potiphar's wife. Well, guess who accuses Joseph? Good old Potiphar. She gonna accuse him because she had a lust problem. She comes after him, and guess what happens next? He goes back to a prison cell. We'll talk about that next week. But what is he doing in the middle of all this? He was learning to suffer successfully. If you look at Joseph's life, you'll see, even in the middle of his pain, even in the middle of he found favor in the eyes of God. So here's my question to you. What do you not know about your life right now? That's a question we have to answer. What do you not know about how your situation is going to end? What do you not know about what tomorrow? There's a lot you don't know, right? Somebody told me one time that you don't know what you don't know. The problem is you don't know that you don't know it, right? You think you know everything. I think I know everything. So we try to control based on what we know. We don't know what tomorrow holds. We don't know that you're sitting in a service today, or you're watching online, or you're here, if you connect, and you don't know that when you walk out of the service today, you can begin a process. You had no idea on Thursday that today could be the beginning of your healing. You don't know a lot of things. Here's the second question. What are you not in control of? A lot. What do you try to control? Everything. Everything. You know what happens when we try to control everything? We worry. You know what worry is? It's a mental strangulation. You know what mental strangulation causes? Mental health crisis. So I worry. You know what I do? I replay it over and over and over and over in my life. 19 times I replay the worst case scenario. And then sometimes they don't even, that wasn't so bad. Too bad I've traumatized myself with my own brain because I've worried myself. And we don't know how to cope, and so we over-medicate, and we put people on medicine for their whole life. I'm not anti-medication, but some people are on medication that was never designed to be a lifelong medication. This is why more people are using nicotine than ever, because you know the best treatment for anxiety? Nicotine, it calms you. That's why so many people who experience trauma smoke. Right? I'm not here to go into this. I'm just simply saying it's deeper than where there's smoke, there's fire. But what are you in control of? You're in control of your outlook. You're in control of what's right in front of you. You're in control of how you respond. And you can say, it hurt. It hurt like hell. But I'm not going to be bitter. I'm not going to be angry, and when those emotions come, I'm going to have somebody walk alongside of me and help me. You can find wholeness and healing. You may not feel like you can because you've been condemned or pushed aside. I remember what it felt like to be in churches, and I would sit there, and the pastor would say something, and I'd be like, oh, God, I hope you don't know what I did. Hope you don't know what happened to me. Hope you don't. And you would feel this guilt and this shame. That is not God's plan. God's plan is for you to say, me! A counselor said yesterday, the partnership said, it's easy to say, my tooth hurts. People go, oh, let me help you. It's a lot harder to say, my heart's broken. Because why? We feel so shamed. So I'm asking you not to focus on what you can't control. Let's focus on what you can control. Don't allow what you can't control this year to keep you from doing what you can. No matter what season you are in, there's a few things that you can control in 2022. I'm just going to give you 3 basic ones, simple ones, that I think are going to help you if you'll do these things. 3 basic things. 1, you can take your next step. Only you can take your next step. Somebody can't take it for you. Somebody can't sign you up and drag you. Some of you have been putting off the good life. I don't want to beat you up. I want to offer you something that I think will help you. Some of you came to the good life and you're like, I'm good. But you realize you're not good. You didn't go to emotionally healthy spirituality. You didn't go to counseling. You didn't go to group there. Take your next step. For some of us in this room and watching online, your next step is to put your trust and faith in Jesus. And then take your next step of baptism with your spiritual family and say, let's walk along this journey together. For some of you, it's serving. Do you know in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your trauma, if you come in and you greet somebody on a Sunday morning and you see a single mom who's carrying all these babies and kids and she can't get in, and you go and help her and you help her kids get connected and her kids find Jesus and she finds Jesus, do you know the joy that you can find how you in the middle of your suffering? You said, that's so hard, you don't understand. I get it. I don't understand. My level of trauma in life is about like this. I feel so unqualified to preach these messages, but somehow in the middle of all this, God's put me in this season to speak truth to pain. And it's uncomfortable. For some of you, you can be generous. You can start being generous and find the joy of generosity. You can take your next step. There's a whole list of things on the chairs that maybe you can get connected with. And if you're not connected with, maybe some of you need to go to Welcome to Relevant, which is next weekend. And it's a 2-week experience where you can connect and learn and know more about how to get connected and take your next step. For some of you, your next step is going to be to go to the prayer room and talk to somebody when you leave. Here's the second thing. You can make God and church a priority this year. Not just in January because you started something new. We have Christians that are Easter. I shouldn't even call them Christians. We have people who attend church that are Easter and Christmas only. And then there's a third wave of January for 3 weeks. Because we're going to start something new. But listen, you got to make it a priority. You got to fight the flesh. You got to get connected, because I believe salvation comes through Jesus Christ, but your wholeness and healing comes through the body of Christ, the local church, not some branch out there. I'm not anti-12-step program. I'm not anti-relationships and community involvement. What I'm saying is Jesus died for his church. And that's where you're going to find wholeness and healing. This probably means you should be at church substantially more than you're not at church. I don't mean just attending. I mean showing up and being the church, serving others, because you were meant for relationship. Acts 2, Acts 4, we were meant to be together. And here's the last one. You can start the year and join me and our staff and our team of 21 days of prayer and fasting. These are on your seats. We talked about it at our live feed this week. I think it was Thursday night. What is fasting? Fasting is a doing without some sort of food in order that you would experience a little bit of discomfort, honestly. That's not TikTok, okay? You can do away with TikTok and you ain't even got to fast. But I'm talking about where you make yourself to a point where, man, I'm really hungry. I don't feel well. Let me lean into Jesus and pray today. Like push yourself. 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, all 21 days. There's 3 different ways on there that you can do that. And then we're going to end our fast. We're going to do something different this year on the 28th, not the 30th. We normally would come together on a Sunday night. We're going to come together on a Friday night for a little different type of worship experience. On a Friday evening, just a worship time. And I just believe in this season, if you'll do those 3 things, if you'll make church a priority, you'll take your next step, and you'll recalibrate your mind with this 21 days of prayer and fasting and push yourself. This can start the journey of healing. But that ain't going to solve your crisis. But next week we'll pick up and give you some more steps. So here's what I want to do. I heard somebody say when I was younger that as pastors, we have to reach a place of holy discontent. And what does that mean? It means we're like, there's a righteous frustration, a holy anger, a holy frustration with church and Christianity as the apathy. One of the things that frustrates me the most, and I love other pastors, we serve other pastors in other churches, and we believe the partnership with other churches is vital. But the American church as a whole has gotten really good at talking down to people, beating people up, or just loving people with so much grace they never deal with their issues. And so you got to be full of grace and full of truth at the same time. And so there's some people today, you need to take some steps. We're going to sing a song in a moment. I'm going to ask you to step out of your seat, and I'm going to ask you to come down front and just stay here for the whole song and just kneel in God's presence and worship, pray, submit yourself. Some of our prayer team are going to come behind you. We're going to give you a chance to go out and pray with our prayer team afterwards. But that's me speaking truth. That's what you need to do. But I also don't want you to feel like I'm talking down to you. I don't want to stand at the top of your pit and go, hey, what you need? Here's the sandwich, right? What I want to do is give you a lifeline. And sometimes that requires us getting down in the pit, doesn't it? Hey, get up on my shoulders. Let me help you out. Let me reach down and let me do something. So here's what I'm going to do, just symbolic. There's nothing overly spiritual about this. This is me, just an act of symbolism. I'm going to step off of this stage. And I'm going to come down front and I'm going to sit right here on the edge, just saying symbolically, as a church, we want to walk through this with you. I don't want to preach at you and tell you to come pray and get it. I want our church to walk this journey with you towards your wholeness and towards your healing. Would you stand to your feet? We're going to sing this song. And when I start to walk down, don't wait. You don't have to wait now. You can step out of your life is going through hell. You got that's your mentality. Life sucks or it has to. I'm just struggling right now. I need the presence of God in my life. I need to take some steps today. I just need this year, I need to recalibrate my mind. I'm just going to ask you, whatever you're going through, to step out of your seat. I'm going to pray for you. We're going to start singing, and then I just want you to meet me and just come and pray. I'm going to give you some instructions before we leave. God, I pray in this moment that the power of God and the Holy Spirit would resonate, and people would, as we sing these words, they would take their steps and just meet me right here at this moment. In Jesus' name, amen. We're not going to stop fighting for people who are hurting. I moved here in 2009. We didn't start a church for church people. We started a church for people who are hurting and unchurched and de-churched because they didn't have anywhere else to turn. And I'm telling you, church, we're going to leave a mark on this community. We may not see it all in our lifetime, but we're going to normalize wholeness. And there's catchphrases out there, stomp the stigma, listen, just normalize being well and getting well and doing hard things. Church, I love you. I do believe this could be the greatest year in our church's history, but in some of your lives as you take next steps. So please, if you need somebody to pray with, our prayer team is standing by. And listen, we're going to help you. You got to do what you can do. Control what you can control. And you can be here next week. You can stop by and sign up for whatever you need to sign up for to take your next step and get plugged in.